Greetings gastronauts, this is Keith Cooks. I'm Keith, and today I'm going to show you how to do a lovely, simple, delicious dessert, blueberry pie. So I'm dedicating this recipe to Mr. Paducki and friends. Hope you enjoy it. Now, blueberries are a lot more common in North America than they are in the UK, which is why this dish kind of originated there. However, they are becoming more plentiful over here, and if you can't get a hold of blueberries or don't fancy paying the extortionate price that you normally have to pay for them, you can use blackberries, which are equally tasty and much more easily available in the UK. Anyway, delicious, easy, lovely, vegetarian, almost vegan. Let's do it. So what's the first thing we need to do to make a pie? Make the pastry! So ingredients: 500 grams of plain all-purpose flour, 200 mils of water, 200 grams of margarine, and a teaspoon of salt. So I've described this as possibly vegan because I just checked on the interwebs. I've always assumed that margarine was vegan, and apparently that is not always the case. There are two gotchas. One is they may contain whey, which is a dairy product, and the other is they may contain vitamin D3, which is animal derived. I'm not a vegan, I don't plan to be, so don't worry. This is what I've got, is stork, and the ingredients don't mention whey, and they do mention vitamin A and D, but they don't say what kind of D it is, and they don't say approved by the Vegan Society or anything like that, so it's up to you, I don't know. So I'm going to use the hot water pastry method that I nearly always use for pastry. So I've got my margarine cut into chunks, and I'm just going to melt that into the water. Try not to let it boil. Okay, that's the margarine melted into the water. I'll add a teaspoon of salt to the flour, stir that in, and add some of the fat and water mixture and stir that into the flour. I don't add it all at once because it's hot and I don't want to get splashed with it. Stir that to get a nice smoothish paste. Okay, you probably won't be able to get all of the flour incorporated, so just finish off, tip it onto a worktop and knead it by hand for a little bit just to get it all in. It's not kneading like kneading bread, it's just mixing by hand. Oh, this is hot. Okay, so that's a lovely smooth blob of pastry, and I'm going to wrap that in plastic film, stick it in the fridge to cool down to about room temperature. Now for filling, you could just open a can, but hey, this is Keith Cooks, we don't do that here. So I've got 350 grams of fresh blueberries, 80 grams of sugar, and a splash of lemon juice. And we'll also have about 80 mils of water, because what we're going to do with the sugar and the water is make a simple syrup, and that just involves melting the sugar into the water. So you just heat it and stir it until the sugar is all melted. Not trying to make a caramel or anything. Now I want to add a splash of lemon juice to the blueberries. These have been washed and picked over, by the way. And stir in the syrup, and we'll let that sit until we're ready for it. Now, as a total pie fanatic, I would say that a pie has to have a lid. It has to be a filling enclosed totally by pastry. But in this case, I'll make an exception. In fact, I've seen blueberry pies with no lid at all, and I would call that a flan. So I'm going to have half a lid, and I'm going to do a fairly special one to show off this wonderful glistening filling. This is the tin I'm going to bake it in. I've got some greaseproof paper, and I've drawn a circle around that, and I'm going to draw a smaller circle in the middle, and you'll see why in a minute. Okay, so to make our bit of a lid, I've got some of the pastry, and I'm just going to roll it into a long rectangle. Now I'm going to cut it into strips about 1 centimetre wide, just under ½ an inch. Now I'm going to start building the lid. So I've got the greaseproof paper with the rings marked on it. They're facing downwards so we don't get ink on the pastry. And I'm just going to form this inner circle and stick the ends together with a bit of water. And then another strip to do the outside ring. Actually, that's not going to be long enough, so I'll have to stick another bit on. And then I'm going to do kind of radiating rays of pastry, but I'm leaving the center of the circle open so you can see the beautiful blueberries. And then we just fill in the gaps. I've got these rims moistened, and let me just pop a bit of pastry between them. I could do a lattice kind of thing, but I did that on my cherry pie recipe that should be linked on the screen now. If not, it'll be in the footnote below. But you've seen that. That's how you do a lattice work. This is this is something else that I'm just making up. Here we go. I'm going to slap that in the freezer for maybe half an hour because I'd love to just be able to turn that upside down onto the pie. Now I'm going to roll out the base of the pie. So I've got my tin and I'm buttering it because, you know, the usual thing. I don't trust Teflon. And you want to roll out a disc about 4 or 5 millimeters thick. That's about 1/4 of an inch and quite a bit bigger diameter than the dish. You also want to get your oven preheating to 180 degrees if it's a fan oven, 200 if it ain't. And then we'll hurl the pastry into the tin and press it down into the edges and trim off the excess. Now I'll pop the filling in, spread it out evenly. Ooh dear, this isn't as much as I thought it was. A shallower dish would have been useful. Anyway, we'll get around that, don't worry. Now here's the lid. It's not frozen solid, but I think that's firm enough to be able to get it on there without it disintegrating. So I'll just moisten the edge and pop it in. So because the filling is a bit more paltry than I was expecting, I'm going to press this down so that the pastry actually sits on top of the fruit. Okay, that's the assembled pie. Now, normally with a pie I would glaze it with beaten egg, but seeing as I'm trying to do this nearly vegan version, just using soy milk, I just looked this up on the interwebs, and all I could find as a suggestion was soy milk. I'm not sure this will work. I know normal milk kind of works, but it's not as shiny as egg. But nobody seems to have come up with a really suitably shiny solution. So I'm going to slap that in the oven for 25 minutes, and then I'll check it, see how we're getting on. Remember, all ovens are different. Well, as I suspected, the soy milk glaze is pretty rubbish. I can't really tell if this is cooked or burnt or what, and it's not shiny and attractive. However, I'm sure it'll be wonderful when I taste it after it's cooled down. Okay, blueberry pie with a dollop of chantilly cream, which the recipe for that should be kicking around somewhere, and served on an ironic piece of slate. Oh yeah. That's lovely. And the pastry's not bad either. So yeah, if you see any cheap blueberries kicking about, buy them up and make this. And that's that. Hope you enjoyed it. Now please share it with all your friends on social media. Subscribe to this channel, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and don't forget the amazing website that has all the details of all the recipes. And thank you for watching. Come back soon.